All right, hi everyone. So this is the lecture that we would have covered in class on Tuesday, February 2nd. I did move it online just because the conditions of the road and the sidewalk is not very good. Um, I live close to campus, and when I went outside to walk to school just to see how things were, um, yeah, it was awful. So it'll be moved online. You can watch this video at your leisure. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you uh, so you can see the notes. You can take the notes. So you should be able to see all this. So we had 4 articles. We had the APA, Ferguson, Bogost, and Jarrett articles. And we are going to cover, oh, sorry, narcissism and violence today. Let's see. So we're going to start with the APA 2015 article. Um, This won't be the full hour, 15 minutes like it would if I was teaching in class, and that's because I don't have to pause for interaction. Um, so the article basically talks about the findings of time spent and violence and outcomes or behaviors in real life. So we'll start with the gaming and time spent on games. So basically, more than 90% of children play video games. And once those children hit ages 12 to 17, that number does spike to 97%. So 97% of adolescents aged 12 to 17 do play video games. Okay. Now, this doesn't say if they're playing 2 hours a day, 2 hours a week, but 97% are playing video games. And children younger than 8 are going to spend an average of 69 minutes on handheld consoles, so Nintendo Switch, um, trying to think other, Xbox, PlayStation 5, or PlayStation in general. Um, they're going to spend 57 minutes on computer games and 45 minutes on mobile games. So this does include tablets. And this is all daily, right? So they're spending an hour and 10 minutes on handheld consoles, almost another hour on computer games, and 45 minutes. So that's almost 3 hours that kids are spending on games daily. And mind you, these are kids that are younger than 8 years old. 85% of the games do include violence, and they may have effects, maybe not in the way that they think, or maybe not at all. So, mass media claims that violent video games are the cause for shootings, such as the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting, Sandy Hook school shooting, and the Navy Yard massacre. And there have been a lot of efforts made to educate parents, limit the release of these games. Um, so, APA formed the Violent Video Game Task Force to investigate violence in video games, right? They were like, this is the problem. Here's what we're going to do to find the solution. And they investigated these claims for decades, but they only found small support for violent video games causing aggressive outcomes. But even though the support is small, it is varied and leaves much room for debate. So they haven't been found, or these studies have found support. Mind you, the support is very, very small, but it's in a variety of age samples, such as young children, adolescents, young adults, and adults. And over the years, the findings show the same support, meaning violence has not increased throughout the years. Um, Even as games tend to become more violent, the violent outbursts has not increased. So it might not be on it might not be on the video games. Major findings about violence in video games show support for decreases in pro social behavior, empathy, and moral engagement, however. So while we don't know that it necessarily increases aggression, we do know that it makes you more of a loner. It makes you less empathetic towards others and have less of this moral engagement. So things that you feel like you should do morally. The task force sets out to find a conclusive way to study aggression and violence as well. So, discipline versus discipline changes how they study violence and violence in video games. So, communication psychology, sociology, social sciences include a variety of factors. So, yes, it was a violent video game, but it was also um, other factors, how you communicate, and all of those that surround the violent and aggressive outcomes, rather than just the violence that criminologists study. That's not to say that one is right and one is wrong, it just leaves room for debate. So the APA finds that education is a tool necessary to prevent violence stemming from video games. Invention or interventions as a resolution are a necessary step to provide scientific evidence to help decrease or end, if possible, violence that stem from video games. Okay. Moving forward, these are the two articles. Ferguson, the top 3 points are from Ferguson, and the bottom point is from Bogost. So we've all heard about the violence in real life and violent video games, but there are minute findings. We just talked about this in the last slide, but it's difficult to replicate these findings. And without replication, this is why there's still major debate over violent video games and violence and aggressions. So as mentioned, social scientists try to tie in other factors to understand the violence that link to aggressive behaviors. But the history of studying violence in video games and aggressive behaviors has often been messy, meaning we find things that don't line up with what other people are saying. We find things that don't match what we've previously done or said ourselves. And many researchers and organizations are trying to make sense of these results. But how do we make sense of results when they're often contradicting, right? How can we definitively say that these games led to these aggressive behaviors? Currently, we've seen that spikes in the game releases actually decrease violent behaviors. This leads researchers to believe that the game release is the reason for the drop in violent or aggressive behaviors. Because you're interested in the game, you are interested in maybe connecting online with friends, you aren't interested in taking things from that game and putting them in real life. Okay. Um, is the involvement of organizations in research of this topic inherently bad? Well, not necessarily, but they often tend to flow toward the funding. Okay. So replication crisis, like we talked about, people can't replicate their studies. Troubled history, we can't agree on things. We don't have this issue of or we do have this issue. Sorry, I was trying to think of how I wanted to say this. We have this issue of just saying, okay, this is what happens. But with everything contradicting each other, it's really hard to say what's actually true. So now we're getting into the involvement of organizations. So those donors who are funding these organizations like APA or NRA or public officials like governors um, tend to have posts tailored towards them, right? So, Governor of Kentucky Matt Bevin followed what organizations fall that were paying for his campaigns. He posted messages and made legislature that matched the people who were donating to his campaign. And this can be a problem because oftentimes the actual research is overlooked because it doesn't match the viewpoints of the funders. So organizational support shouldn't be inherently bad, but in many cases it is insufficient or problematic research, and this leads to clickbait. Okay. Just a little bit about the Bogost article. Violence in video games, oftentimes we focus on being the enemy, but recently it's actually become a political tool because it gives politicians the ability to take a stance and use research to defeat an opponent on this topic, right? But we just talked about that involvement of organizations can be problematic because it matches their own personal viewpoints rather than the actual research. So when violence in video games was first studied, it was studied from arcade style games like Pac Man. And understanding violent behaviors didn't make sense to study it in games like Pac Man, but games got a lot more mature in nature and in themes, and violent themes did become an area of interest. So, with all the school shootings and mass shootings, it's often been blamed on video games, but there were links between them that were often weak. So, they would focus on the fact that you play violent video games, whether that was the main game or games that you played or not. So, in many shootings that happened, the video games that had been blamed on, violent video games were not the main type of game played. In one case, Dance Dance Revolution was the game that was played the most. So, how does that impact the statements that violent video games are what causes violence? And violent video games actually do nothing to predict violent acts. There's no strong tie, strong connection. All right, so we're going to switch points and talk about narcissism. Um, so many researchers have argued that millennials and Gen Z are narcissistic because they self-promote, self-reflect, and use media for self-esteem. But jury's still divided on this, and we're actually more jury's decided if we are actually more narcissistic than older generations. Okay. Um, so really the question is, are we more narcissistic or are the cultural changes that have occurred, do they make it seem that way? In previous decades, our society was more individualistic, or not was, our society has become more individualistic. So America is already an individualistic society, but social media made it so we become more individualistic. We focus on and celebrate our individual accomplishments rather than civic duty. And this makes us seem more narcissistic, but are we really? Um, Jury duty is a civic duty, right? And I was called during college, but that was my way out. I know it's a civic duty, I know it's a privilege. If selected, I would have had to miss college classes, and that might have jeopardized my future success in those classes and then potentially graduating. I didn't really care that it was a civic duty. And oftentimes, that's how it is for a lot of people. We don't care. We care about our successes in those situations. So, our generation is often referred to as starting the self esteem movement, right? So, we talked about narcissism. Now we're getting into self esteem. As I talked about, I use social media for support that helped with my self esteem, as do many of you. Some of you may use social media to improve your self esteem, but the self esteem movement is because we have other uses of media than just to portray ourselves. Although we should avoid vague statements like really looking for some support, those never end well. But low self esteem is a factor in psychological disorders and psychological issues, and media can actually help provide self love and nurture us in the ways that we need. Moving back to narcissistic personalities, um, the narcissistic personality measure was created, and the 2009 cohort was found to be more narcissistic than the 1982 cohort. But what about other cohorts in between? What about this measure? Many researchers don't believe that the measurement actually measures narcissism correctly. So, this measure was created in order to measure narcissism, but it doesn't actually measure narcissism. And this is problematic because the whole factor the measure is supposed to study, it doesn't actually capture what it's supposed to. So, are we really more narcissistic? Probably not, at least when using that measure. And because of this, understanding issues with the measures, it's actually been found that our generation was more generous than previous generations. This measure was shown that narcissism does change as we age. So um, we tend to think about the I over the we less as we get older. Narcissism is definitely a trait that decreases as we age because we become more responsible for others. We get married, we have kids. We got engaged, we get married, we have kids. We become responsible for them, valuing the we as a family unit. We also tend to post about them via social media more than we're posting of just us or our interests. We do also tend to be more generous. We use our social media platforms to help others in need. So think about sharing posts on Facebook, right? Somebody's looking for a dog or a cat. We share these posts. Um, Again, another personal story I have. Um, if you've ever been in our department and met Terry, you know she is a complete animal lover. So she's in all these groups that support dogs. I mean, she likes cats too, but she's in all these groups to support animals. Well, she had posted a post that somebody in the group had shared that their dog got out and had been missing, and they were offering a reward or whatever. So one night, I am going to study for my comprehensive exams at Permanis with my friend Lindsay. Sorry, the story was like a little drawn out at the beginning. Um, so I'm going to study for my comprehensive exams at Permanis with Lindsay. And we see this dog run across the road in front of us. And Richard goes, "Should we stop?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know this dog, but it looks like it has a collar on. So yeah, we should stop. So we stop, and because Richard's dropping me off on his way to work because he works nights. So we stop, and I'm looking at this dog, And I'm like, this dog looks familiar. There's no tags. It's a little Shih Tzu. I don't know what to do. But then I get to thinking, and like at first, the dog was a little timid to come to me. I'm a stranger, but it pees in the road because it's scared. And then it comes to me. And I can't remember what this dog's name was, but I'm like, this dog looks familiar. So I go to Terry's Facebook and I find this post. And I'm looking and I'm like, I think this is the dog. But there were no tags on the dog's collar. So I call the number that's on the flyer and I was like, hey, I think I found your dog. Uh, she appears to be female. Can you tell me, was the dog wearing a collar? And the woman on the other end was like, yeah, she's got a peach collar on with white polka dots, and there's no tags on it because we just got that collar and we were getting ready to put the tags on when she got out. And I said, okay, I have your dog. Um, can you meet me at outside of Permani Brothers in the Suncrest Town Center? Um, I'll bring your dog. I'm on my way there right now. And they were like, yes. And when the family came to get me, or to not get me, to meet me, they were like, here's the $500 reward. Like they were offering $500. I could have taken that. I could have been $500 richer. And I was like, no, I'm a dog mom. Like, I get it. I don't want your money. I would want my dog to be found safe and somebody to call me and let me know. And they were like, well, let us buy you a drink. And I was like, no, 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 no. Go spend time with your little baby. Like, enjoy. And that's what you see with a lot of our generation. We don't even want a drink. We don't want your money or anything like that. We just want to do the right thing. And these measures oftentimes capture that we are more generous than other previous generations, right? Um, so sharing things on Facebook, GoFundMe, whether you just share the GoFundMe or you actually donate to one, it's controlled by the media and we tend to help others. Therefore, we are valuing the we over the I. So, are we actually narcissistic? Are we confident? It depends on how old we are and if it's viewed as a healthy thing or not. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop for today. Um, have a wonderful snow day from our class. I know like the university hasn't really canceled, but I did. If you have questions over lecture, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm hoping this snow starts to melt or at least roads and stuff become clear soon. Um, and then I'll be back to regular classes on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. Okay. Sorry. Have a wonderful afternoon and I will see you on Thursday. All right. Bye.